Going to get started. There's a starter beer that's going around right now. This is a yeah. If you want to grab your seats, there's a starter beer that's going around for this presentation. It's a thank you. It's a saison with Sauvignon Blanc grapes. So you guys can try some of this, and I'll tell you a little bit about it when we get into it. So I've had a lot of people over the years asking me about fruit beers. How do you do fruit beers? I keep getting more and more questions on it, and so I just decided, well, why not just do a presentation on it? And so that's what we're doing today. And so when I started preparing for this presentation, I started going through the beers I brewed in the past. I started counting them all up, and I realized that I brewed over 100 fruit beers, in the 30 plus years I've been brewing. So yeah, it's like, I didn't even think about it, but it's one of the easiest things to add to a beer. And so it just, and to get creative with. And one of the ways I thought about fruit beers is that a lot of times we're trying to use hops to get this fruit character or that fruit character. And I was always scratching my head going, well, if you want grapefruit, why don't you just add grapefruit? Why are you trying to get grapefruit out of your hops, So hopefully, did everybody get a pour of this? If you didn't get a pour of this, I think there's still some more. Okay. Oh, Lauren didn't get any. Lauren and Judy. He probably did. He's probably just asking for more. So this is what this presentation's about right here. And hopefully you guys we're going to try a bunch of beers in the process. We'll talk about all the different ways we can fruit things, and hopefully we'll all learn something out of it. All right, so this is like the first thing I would tell people is to get when you're making a beer, you're making something special, is to think about have a vision of what that beer could be. Something that's going to be inspiring. And one of the companies that I think does a really great job at this is Dogfish Head. They always try to get some story behind their beer and everything like that. And in this case, this is one of their fruit beers. They call it Fruitful Fort, and the tagline is really a complex ale brewed with a boatload of berries. And so it just kind of gets you makes you think about it, makes you think about what you're going to get, and it makes it feel a little bit more special. And so over the years, I've come up with a number of different beers, and some of these are all ones that I've made up here: orange chocolate porter, strawberry blonde, pineapple IPA, this Sauvignon Blanc saison, grapefruit pale ale. Another one that was really inspiring to me was one that Jeremy made with our lambic base, and he called it a guavois. Just kind of. That's what he did. And he happened to bring some today. So does anybody here want to try it? All right. Okay. Jeremy, you got to open it. People want to try it. So we're going to pass that one around too. So hopefully you have another glass that's available other than this one right here. And while this is going around, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Sauvignon Blanc Saison. And so, I've had a lot of, I'm a big fan of Saisons. And I've had a lot of different ones where you can do a lot of different things with them. And so I got this idea about, well, wouldn't it be great to do it with Sauvignon Blanc grapes? And I also was planning on using those grapes. Yeah, you can fill one of those up. I was also planning on using those grapes to make the 30th anniversary Society of Barley Engineers barley champagne, which it's already been made. It's in the barrel right now, waiting for next February, a year from now, when we'll try it. But I got enough of this concentrate to make this beer as well. So it's about 15% of Sauvignon Blanc grape juice. I used concentrate. Concentrate's easier if people are shipping it. So I use concentrate for this to make it. And we're going to talk about a lot of the different ways you can get formats you can get fruit in, but that's just one example right here. Any thoughts on this beer? Yeah. Yeah, it's carbonated on a very high, I think it's maybe 4 volumes, something like that. So, and I do that with a lot of like the lambics. I carbonate them very high. So I've been doing that also with my saisons. Yeah.
Just a quick note, if you guys have questions, stick your hand up. I'll come around with the microphone so everybody, including the people over Zoom, can hear.
Okay, so let's keep going. So the first thing I would tell you is that when you have an idea, you've come up with your idea, you come up with your vision for what you want to do, test it first. Test it on a small batch. And so what you can do is you can get, you get your beer, get whatever fruit you're going to do, put it right into the beer, see if it seems to make sense that these things marry well together. And then that can give you the idea of whether this is going to work for you before you actually go out and brew a whole batch of it. And so I have a friend who is in the business of coffee flavorings. And so she had this big kit of all these different flavorings. And so she brought this kit over to my place. And I had this whole lineup of all these different beers. And so we just sat down and just spent an evening just, try this flavoring with this beer. Try this one with this beer. Try this one with this beer. And out of that whole evening of all that really hard work that we were doing, trying to look at different flavorings, one of them stood out to me, and that was the a pineapple flavoring that she had with an IPA. And so it ended up being one of the beers that I've been making, and has been a very popular beer in terms of requests. I've made it for several people's weddings and things like that. And so this is kind of where some of the ideas. This is the idea of testing it before you actually go do it. Another story where I tested. I had this idea I was going to make a beer with jasmine. I said, "Oh, that sounds really good. I could put jasmine and make the beer with it." I took the jasmine flowers from my yard. I put them into the beer, and everything was like really soapy, and I didn't like it at all. And so that told me, no, don't do that, because I can imagine I had 12-gallon batch of that, something like that I didn't like. So that's my message on this, is that try this stuff so you get an idea of what you're doing first. Now this is a kind of a really busy slide right here, but when I started thinking about what are all the ways you can add fruit, there's actually quite a lot of them, and I don't know if is there anybody here who's tried all of these different ways to add fruit? Probably not. I have, but I get to thinking about it, and there's a reason for each one of them, a purpose for each one. Some of them, I think, from my own experience, I have some preferences, especially for what you use them for. So I would say that, for example, with the fresh whole, you hear a lot of talk about brewing with whole fruit. And when you're brewing with whole fruit, people ask me when would you do that? Well, if the fruit is abundant and fresh, in really good form, then that's the best time to do it. If it's not that in season and you can't get good fruit with it, you're probably better off going with one of the other formats. Where's Jeremy? Jeremy, you want to say anything about this guavois? Let's let Jeremy say something about the guavois, because this is done with fresh fruit. You tell us a little bit about where it came from and the story behind it.
It kind of crosses categories as fresh and frozen, just because I find it easier to, first of all, freeze it. I'll quarter, the guava specifically, I'll quarter them because they're like way more seed than fruit. Then I freeze them, and then when they come out, they're kind of sanitized, and then I'll pasteurize them anyway. What I'll do is I'll put them in a pot with the lid on to try to keep as many of the volatiles in, and just keep it at 170 for many hours. And then it's pretty much goo. I don't know how many categories is that. There's fresh, frozen, and goo. But I'll just pour the whole thing in. Everything settles out pretty well. Seeds go to the bottom. I'll just filter up, siphon off the top when it's done on it. The inspiration was that we have a friend with a prodigious guava tree that he just kind of shoves it on everybody. And so we said, well, let's make a beer out of it. And the first beer we made was a Belgian pale ale, and then the guava was second. They're both pretty popular.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this. This for me is one of the. It's a great fruit to add to lambics because it works so well with it. And so, and it was a real popular at the festival when we brought it. Talking about now about purees. Purees are a little bit easier to work with. This is often these are usually pasteurized. They're usually you can just literally just dump them in when you ferment them, and so they're a little bit easier to work with. Some people say they have a jammier flavor, and I even saw people recommending if you really like that kind of a flavor, that you could actually take your fresh fruit and cook it so that you get that kind of a jammy flavor. So this is just an option for how you do it. But I think mostly it's a convenient way to get something that's fairly fresh. Then the other one, which is one of my favorites, is the frozen. You can't get all fruit in a frozen format, but a lot of times you can. And the reason why I like it is because that fruit is generally picked when it's really ripe. They don't have to. They're going to freeze it. They don't have to worry about it's going to ship and how long it's going to sit on the shelf before it expires. So it's generally a real fresh fruit. And then also the freezing process breaks open the cell membranes, and so it's easier for you to access the fruit flavor. So I like it also because if I'm going to break the pieces up when they're frozen, it doesn't make a huge mess. It's a little easier to break them up. So I do like that. But you can't get it, and you can't get all the fruits in that format. So there's different formats for different purposes. Looking at concentrate, this is the saison that I passed around. That one used concentrate. I would have loved to have been able to go to one of the wineries and get some Sauvignon Blanc grapes right when they were, just pressing them and get some juice and stuff like that. And I know some people that have relationship with a winery are able to do that, but you have to show up at the right time because it's when they're harvesting. So it's a little hard to do. It's a little easier to get something that they've concentrated and can ship to you. So that's what I used for that. Extract. Extract's another easy thing to do. I'm not a big fan of extract. I'll tell you up front because I think a lot of times the flavors they come out off as being a little artificial. But I will say that it's a good way. I've seen people where they'll just use it as a little boost. So you can get a boost in flavor. You can build off of a flavor that you already have there. Maybe you had a fresh fruit. Maybe then you want to bottle. At bottling time, you want to add a little bit of extract. That's a good way to boost it. I think Chris has a comment. I think he wants to make a comment here.
So one comment about extracts or natural flavors is that they're allowed by legal definitions to include up to 0.1% top notes, and those can be artificial and they can still call it natural. And those flavors are so strong that they can basically make something as unnatural as they want and still call it natural. So most of the natural flavors you're finding have enough artificial flavor that a lot of the flavoring is actually artificial, even though they're allowed to call them natural. So that's something to be aware of. And that I have a friend who works in the flavor industry who pointed that out. And if you look at the definitions, they are allowed to have that 0.1% top note, which if something is mostly water and you add 0.1% of something extremely strong, you can make it as strong as you want.
Yeah, so good point. And it may be you may find some extracts that are better than other ones that work for you. So you might have to look at it a little bit. Again, this would be an area where experimenting, trying to take a drop and drop it into your beer first. If it doesn't taste good in your beer, it's not going to taste good when you brew when you brew something new with it. So that's extracts. Juice is another one that I've used. Also, the pineapple IPA that I make, I tried it first with extract. Then I tried it with fresh pineapple, and then I tried it with a pineapple juice. And that it wasn't until I got to the pineapple juice that I made my best IPA. And on a West Coast IPA, when you add sugar to a West Coast IPA to help dry it out. And so basically, what I did with the pineapple juice is I calculated how much water content I was putting in there and accounted for that. I counted for the sugar level and made that basically the same level that you would see on a West Coast IPA, and then the rest of it is just the pineapple flavor. And I put it right into the fermenter, and let it go in the fermentation process, and you get a really nice pineapple flavor with it. So that's what you can do with juice. I think some things work better with that than other things. So you'll have to experiment with it so that you know what you'll do with it. Then dried fruit. Dried fruit is some fruits are real popular, really easy to get in dried format. Things like apricots, that comes to mind. I have an apricot lambic that if you guys want to stay after class and try the apricot lambic, if you haven't already tried it, then you can try it. That one's done with dried fruit, but I only have one big bottle of it. So yeah, you have to stay after class for it. Syrups. Syrups are another one. We used to do this in the first days when we first started making lambics. We would take those Italian syrups and we would put those into the kegs, and then we would serve them that way. And you're kind of going to get a lambic that's a little bit more like a Lindemann's type of a lambic. It's sweeter. But sometimes if you want looking for something that's sweeter, and you add that at the end of the process, it's a good way to back sweeten something, get a little bit of sweetness to it and some fruit flavor. So it's just an option for you. And then the last one, which I don't think a lot of people really spend a lot of time with, it's maybe a little bit underappreciated, is using zest. And I've done this. In fact, let's pass around a beer that I just did with this. If somebody wants to grab, there's a growler in that blue in the blue cooler right there. Let's pass that around. This is the Snarky Skipper, Super Citrus Snarky Skipper. And so all I did with this is I took my Snarky Skipper IPA and then I added some orange zest to it. And with zest, I would prefer to do zest in something like an orange because I don't want all the citric acid. I don't want to get the orange juice in there just to add orange juice. But the zest gives you a lot of flavor to it. You guys will see what I'm talking about. Yeah. So so that covers kind of all the different formats. Yes.
So Andy, I have a question. Have you actually ever used jam?
No, I've not used.
You talk about jammy. It's a concentrated fruit. I don't know. What do you
I've
think?
not used jam. A lot of times you don't want the pectins and things like that from the fruit. But normally I try to stay away from the cooked fruit as much as possible. So, but no, I haven't tried that. I have tried a jelly donut before. I don't recommend it.
Have you used zest in making a tincture?
I haven't done it that way, but you can. I mean, you can do that, make a tincture out of it, and then add that, or make a tincture and use it for something else. I just add the zest directly to the kegs, and that's what this is right here. So this is added directly to the kegs. Yeah, so the question is, are some fruits better in some formats than others? And the answer is yes. So for example, I wouldn't use orange juice. I wouldn't add orange juice to my beer, but orange zest is great. Same thing with grapefruit. Grapefruit and orange zest, they work really well. But then I'm not going to go try to, so like other fruits, like ones I can get in frozen format, those work really well. In frozen format. So I guess it just depends. It depends on what works best for your brewing process, but also what works best for the fruit. All right, so I want to talk a little. Corey has a question.
It says that secondary fermentation can maximize the fruit flavor. Now, is it just separating the beer from the yeast kind of helps extract some of the flavors without an overly vigorous fermentation? So let's say someone has a tank, right, that they're going to do everything in that one tank. Would you recommend them remove the yeast before you add the fruit?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not as concerned with the yeast as with the production of CO2. So the CO2 could scrub out some of the flavors, and so generally, when you're adding flavorings, and I try to add them later in the process, I think it's okay that that there's some yeast there. If you only have one, if that's the way that your system works, I think that's okay. But with the pineapple juice, I added it at the beginning of the fermentation, and that turned out really well. So I think it depends on what works for your setup. So let me talk a little bit about when to add fruit, because this is the kind of leading question to this. And so my preference is to add things kind of in the toward the tail end of fermentation for most of the things that I do. But sometimes it's appropriate to add things right into the keg, like the zest. You can add them right into the keg. If you were going to use syrups or things like that to back sweeten, you add them right into the keg because you don't want it to ferment, longer. You want to keep some of that sweetness to it. So those are times when you might want to do that. I don't ever add anything. I don't ever add it to the boiling kettle or to the whirlpool. But if you're really worried about really worried about sanitation, that could be something that you could do. I think Jeremy said that he does that with the guavois. So Lauren has a question.
So you're talking about adding zest directly to a keg. Are you using a muslin bag or something to be able to pull the pulp out?
I don't want to give away what happens on the rest of the presentation, but yes. So we'll cover that. We'll cover that later in the presentation.
Mike's also got a question. He got skipped.
Okay.
I didn't hear that last one. But for instance, if you do the secondary fermentation and you go, it just doesn't have all the flavor I'm looking for, so you put it in some additional fruit, either puree or actual fruit in the serving keg, how long will it last before it starts re-fermenting?
Yeah,
there's always yeast still in there.
Yeah, so if you keep it cold, it could be there for a while and not ferment. I mean, because it depends on like how well your yeast could ferment at lower temperatures. So at those very low temperatures, especially, you keep it really cold. But we have done this in the past. We've gone to the festival, and on Friday night, taken a keg of lambic, stuck in a pound of frozen fruit, put the thing on there, and then served it the next day. So we do that. But if you let it sit in your fridge, in a cool tank, you can let it sit there for a while before it's really going to start fermenting out. A month? I don't know. I would think probably weeks, not months. I wouldn't probably try to do that. If it's good enough, it shouldn't last that long anyways, right? This is great music for this presentation too, don't you guys think? Yeah. All right. Okay, so yes, you can see all my slides have really colorful things on there. This is one of the great things about fruit, is you can also add color to your beers when you're doing them. So how to prepare whole fruit. And so if you've got, some whole fruit and you don't just stick that in, you really want to make sure that the beer can access everything within the fruit. And so generally you're taking off whatever skins there are, you're slicing it, cutting it enough so that the beer can interact with the fruit. And normally what you do, the best fruit beers that I've had are beers where you allow the sugars in the fruit to ferment out. So you get something, it depends on what you're going for. If you're going for something that's going to have, you're going to get that sweetness on there, then your desire the sweetness, you could leave it that way so that you're going to get some sweetness. But normally you want the fruit to ferment out. So you're fermenting out the sugars and you're getting the fruit flavors to it. The beer has enough sugar in it to carry the fruit flavor. You don't need extra sugar to make it sweet. So this is kind of to Lauren's question right here. So normally I would take a nylon mesh bag, sanitized. I'd have a weight sanitized weight in there, I'd put the fruit in there and drop it into the fermenter so that it gets completely submerged. So all the fruit is being in contact with the beer, and then you let it ferment. For you guys that are making lambics, that have your lambics at home, and you want to add fruit to them, here you can see I'm saying let the fruit stand and ferment for 1 to 2 weeks. You can go longer with a lambic. You can let it sit longer and let it sit on the fruits. You also may want to add some fresh yeast to it. If you've got a lambic that has been harvested in November and you're going to add fruit to it, maybe the yeast isn't really healthy enough to ferment out your sugars. If you've got a little bit of fresh yeast you can add to it, can help ferment out the sugars when it's on the fruit. So if you guys have the lambic and you're preparing to go to the festival, then this is something you should be thinking about. Question from Chris. Yeah, so step 2, I would do a sanitizer dip for it. So normally if you it depends on the fruit and where you got it from, but a lot of fruit on the skins, they have, there's a lot of natural yeasts and bacteria that are on there that can actually be desirable for some flavors if you're making something very complex or, sour beers. So I wouldn't do it for a lambic. I wouldn't feel it was necessary for a lambic. But if you're making a, blonde ale or something like that, you may have things on the outsides of the skins. Now, if you're peeling and taking the skins off, then you wouldn't need to do that, obviously. So it kind of does depend on what you're doing. Okay. So, let's keep going. This is whole fruit preparation. So let's talk about frozen fruit preparation. And here you can see in the picture, you can see the kind of the nylon bag, and this is what I use for weights right there. These things make great weights. You sanitize them. I actually take the fruit, and depending on what kind of fruit it is, I'll, like this one right here, you can see I actually crushed the raspberries just to give it a little bit more access. And it's pretty easy to crush when it's frozen. So you can crush the berries, get a little bit more access. If you've got frozen, say peaches or something like that, they're sliced, you probably generally have enough surface area on there. You don't have to do anything to it. But if there's other fruit where it's got some kind of a skin on it or something like that, say cherries, for example. If you got cherries, frozen cherries, I feel better about crushing those than just throwing the cherries in, because I think you're going to get better utilization. So same idea though, put it in the bag, let it sink it down to the bottom, and then let it go for 1 or 2 weeks for a standard beer. You could go longer for a lambic or for a sour. Dried fruit. So dried fruit, you have to be a little bit careful with dried fruit because a lot of it, they have sulfites that could be in there, and that could harm your beer. And so one process that I saw about how to dilute sulfites out is to put it in warm water, 10 to 20 minutes, and you can actually then throw away that water. You can actually dilute your sulfites down to something that is reasonable, isn't going to interact with your yeast. But same idea then. Once you've done that, put it in a nylon mesh bag, sink it down to the bottom of your fermenter so it's in contact. And then this one right here with the zest. So I really like this picture right here because it kind of gives me the idea of how you want to do your zest. You really want to get the outside of this. You don't want to get the pith of the fruit. This works really well with grapefruit and with oranges. So you get this zest. You can make them in like spirals like this, or you can use a potato peeler and get little peels for them. The idea is I don't think you could grate them. You can do grating like you could do in cooking, but then I'm more concerned about being able to separate the zest now from the beer and not having it clog up your system and all that kind of stuff. So if you can do larger pieces of it, then it's a little easier to put it into a mesh bag and keep it separated and be able to remove it when you want to remove it. So just a little tip right there. And you can you can put the zest in the keg, serving keg, and just leave it there, let it there, sit there for for weeks and months. Another thing that this is something also came up in the session on resurrecting beer when we talked about how to resurrect your beer, is that if you take an IPA that's getting a little long in the tooth, it's a good way to give yourself a burst of flavor, because now you got this bright orange flavor or bright grapefruit flavor that's real fresh, and you can stick that on an IPA that may be a little bit aging, and you end up with something that's got real fresh notes to it. So Chris has a question.
So just to comment on a tool for zesting, there's something called a Rotato that you can get on Amazon for about $20. It's an electric potato peeler that also works well for zesting. And you put the fruit in there and press the start button, and it gives you a long continuous spiral of all the zest from the piece of fruit. It leaves some strips on the top and bottom, so it's not great for limes, for example, because those are so small that you're losing half the zest. And it also doesn't work for large grapefruit because they'll bind against the tall post. But anything like small to medium grapefruit, oranges, lemons, tangelos, anything in that range, it works really well. And if you don't mind losing a little bit of zest on the top and bottom, and you've got plenty of fruit, it's a great way to do it really quickly and easily.
Any comments on the Super Citrus IPA that I passed around? You guys like it? Yeah. I don't know why more people don't use. You're trying to get orange out of your hops. You're trying to get grapefruit out of your hops. I don't know why more people don't use zest. All right, let's keep going. So no prep formats. These are ones that are a little simpler to use. You basically can just add them right in there. Purees, the juices, extracts, syrups. These things you can just add. So the convenience is I think one of the main motivations for using these formats. Now, big question. A lot of you ask me about dosing fruit. How much fruit do I add? And the number one thing I would tell you would be that you should keep good records, and you should make the dosing based on your previous experience. And so, because I know you're just laughing. What do I do the first time? Well, you're going to make a little bit of a guess the first time, but keep your notes and then make changes as you do that, and that's how you'll narrow in on where it needs to be, because it's all about balance, and the different fruits paired with different beers. I'm going to show you a table in just a minute where you can get an idea of how to do this with fresh fruit, or what ballpark range, but you're going to see they really are ranges, and in order to get the beer the way you want it to be, you may have to experiment with it or do more than one batch to get it to where you want it to be. I guess another note here, a couple other notes here, is that you can actually, if you say you overfruit the beer, or say you made a 5-gallon batch, take 1 gallon off, put fruit in it, then decide how you like it. If you think it's too much fruit flavor, start blending it back. Blend your normal beer back into it. So you could shoot on the high side, with 1 gallon, and then blend it down to where you think it's the right place, and then now you've got your amount, your recipe figured out. So that's one way to do it. Another way is, if you're on the low side, is you can add some boost to it using extracts, something like that. Just give it a little bit of a boost so that you can get to where you want it to be. So this is the table that I told you about right here, and the way I see it really is that you have some beers that have very strong flavor profiles. Doesn't necessarily mean they're dark beers or light beers or whatever. They have strong profiles. If you want the fruit to be balanced in them, you're going to need more of a particular fruit in there. And likewise, you have some fruits that have a very strong flavor, and they need more if they're going to be especially paired with a stronger beer. And so I've kind of separated this table into, the beer flavor intensity, light, medium, and strong, and then the fruit flavor intensity, light, medium, and strong, and giving you some, maybe a guideline of where to start with. So you could see if you have got like a a strong beer, a stout, a barley wine, or strong ale, and you're using something that has a very light flavor, you might need a lot of these things. So you're like looking at 1.5 to 4 pounds per gallon. If you don't know where you want to start with something, a good place to start would be 1 pound per gallon. But if you're sort of gauge it by what the flavor profile, the flavor strength of your beer is, and also what the profile is of the fruit, then you can make adjustments before you do this. And this is for whole fruit. This would apply to frozen fruit. It's not going to apply to dried fruit. Obviously, you dried the fruit. The fruit is you're going to need less poundage of fruit because there's no water in it. Any questions about the table? It's sort of just a starting point. All right, so then what you can do once you've got there, we talk about adjusting your base beer recipe to account for fruit additions. Okay, this is something I learned over the years, is that what happens is the fruit actually will change your beer, not just the fruit flavor, but other things about it. So you may have to compensate for the beer you're trying to make based on the fruit that you're adding. And I've had to do that with the pineapple IPA, for example, the pineapple IPA that I make. When I first made it, the acidity of the pineapple juice tended to compound with the hop bitterness, and the beer was more bitter, had a more bitter perception than the IPA did originally without the pineapple. And so I dialed back on the bittering hops, basically to compensate for the acidity that I had in the pineapple juice. So we'll talk a little bit about how to do this now. So first thing is looking at malt and sugar adjustment. So for example, you may want to adjust this based on the beer that you're trying to make. A lot of times the fruit is going to be simple sugars that are easy to ferment out. So they'll tend to, the fruit that you're adding will tend to not increase the alcohol, but actually decrease the alcohol, because usually the fruit on its own has a lower gravity usually than what you're brewing. Depends on what you're brewing. So if you wanted to compensate for that, you may want to brew your beer at a little bit of a higher gravity. You may also want to, for example, in the pineapple IPA that I was doing, in the West Coast IPA, I would add sugar. But since I was adding the pineapple juice with all that sugar in there, I basically took the sugar off the table, and I'm using the pineapple juice for the sugar in addition to the pineapple flavor. So these are the kinds of things that you can do to adjust your malt to account for whatever fruit you might be using. Let's talk about hop adjustment. So a lot of times we're trying to get fruit flavors, and the fruit flavors are not easy to get out of the fruit. Some fruits like dragon fruit or other fruits might be difficult to get all the fruit flavors you want, melon or something like that. So what you can do is you can select hop varieties that will tend to accentuate that fruit flavor. So if you're making a beer, the beer that I made that was for the 30th anniversary, in which I used the Sauvignon Blanc concentrate, I used Nelson hops, because Nelson hops give you that sort of the white grape flavor. And so it's a way to sort of to build on the flavor that you're trying to get out of it. And also reducing the hop bitterness. I think this is a big one, reducing the hop bitterness to account for the increase in acidity. And this is a good time to pass around another couple beers here. I want to actually going to show you the difference in this. I have 2 apple lambics that I made. One of them, they're done with 2 different apples, but the main difference really is the amount of apples that were added, the dosing of apples that are added to them. The first one that I made, it has a high dose, and the second one that has a much lower dose. So I need a few volunteers actually for this. Well, yeah, you can double fist it, or you can one and someone else will do the other one? They're both mine. Yeah. Yeah, so the beers that are going to go around here, there are two beers that are going to go around. I have two apple trees on my property. One of them is an Anna apple tree, and the other one's a Fuji apple tree. And Anna apple tree gets basically gives you early apples, and the Fuji one gives you late apples, late in the season. And so I had just a bumper crop of Anna apples, and so I just loaded in. Love it, I love it.
Wow.
I loaded in as many as I could possibly get.
Andy, to decrease the hop bitterness, do you just decrease the amount of hops, or do you put it later in the boil?
I would decrease the amount of hops that I used. That's how I would do it. So you're going to notice probably a big difference between these two apple lambics. One of them is a lot sharper, a lot tartar than the other one, and that was the first one that I made before I adjusted the recipe. So my thinking was that if more is better. I want more flavor. It's hard to get flavor out of apples, so I added 4 pounds per gallon of Anna apples. There was literally no more space in the fermenter to fit any more apples. It was all apples with just some lambic around it. I mean, that's what it looked like. But you're going to notice when you try the flavor of it, you're going to notice it's got a very tart flavor. And so what I did is I backed it off to 2 pounds per gallon for the Fuji, and I think you're going to get a more well-rounded beer out of that one. Yes. So the Anna one is tartar. The Anna one has 4 pounds per gallon of apples, and the Fuji one has 2 pounds per gallon of apples. So it's not so much the difference between the apple variety. It's mostly the dosing. I think is a difference between that. So we'll just give you an idea. Stan has a question. I've been meaning to get around and start measuring the pH of all my lambics, but I haven't got around to it yet. Corey, you're using your pH meter? Corey says it's 3.8. All right. All right, so talking about other things, about other adjustments, we shouldn't leave out yeast. Yeast can add a lot of esters to your beer, so you could choose a yeast strain that would accentuate the flavor of the fruit that you might be trying to, or complement the flavor of the fruit that you're trying to bring out. So this is another thing to consider in adjusting your recipe for the fruit that you're adding. Oh yeah, then we shouldn't forget about this. We shouldn't forget about adjusting the fruit. This is the lesson I learned on the apple one right here, is that you can adjust malt, you can adjust the hops, but also adjusting the fruit. And there's several things that you can do for this. One of them is, for example, you could use a second fruit. You could use apricots to bring out a peach flavor. You could use something like that. You could use coloring fruit if you're not getting enough red color. You could use some beet juice to get the color the way that people might expect it. And then you could also boost the flavor with extract at bottling time. That's the end of the presentation here. You guys have any other questions? I know we answered a lot along the way, but what are the questions we have? Jacques has a question.
you show a lot of pictures of blueberries in a lot of your presentations, but it didn't come up in a lot. And I know it's because blueberries are very tough flavor to extract something that tastes like a blueberry from it.
Have you tried this one right here? This is this blueberry mead.
I have not, but I'd like to.
You should come here and try this later. That's a beautiful mead. Hopefully that shows up at the outrageous bottle share. But
do you use blueberries much, Andy, or
I have.
you done it? And what have you had to do
yeah,
to accommodate?
Yeah, so I've made a blueberry lambic, and it turned out pretty well. Sometimes you don't get the color. Like Jim has got a great color out of that blueberry mead. Sometimes out of blueberries, I don't get the color that can. If you look at a blueberry, it's kind of a white fleshy, and sometimes you don't get the color. That might be an area where if you got all the flavor you wanted but not the color, that you could put something in there that would give you the color also. Depends on the variety, is what Ryan's saying. Question back here.
So a brewery that I used to work at, that shall not be named, we mainly used purees in flavoring our beers. And so one big problem that we always had with purees is that it's very hard to settle out. And so we end up dumping a good quarter of a keg per per time. When you use purees, do you have any issues with that? And if so, have you done anything special to try to combat that to maximize your utilization of the beer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so normally purees are not my first choice, and it's for that reason. But I have done it before, and the times when I've done it, I've just sort of let it be a part of the mix of the beer. But I could see how if you're brewing on a professional level, and you want that to all settle out, and then you end up dumping beer to make that happen. Yeah, so that could be a consideration in what you select. But the one thing about the purees, because they're normally all pasteurized, that you have less of a concern about, especially in a professional brewery, less of a concern about ending up picking up something from the fruit. Corey's got a question.
What's the best way to handle strawberries? Sometimes they can kind of come off as phenolic.
So yeah, Corey's saying sometimes they come off as phenolic. I have not had that problem with strawberries. My biggest problem with strawberries is that it doesn't have a very strong flavor profile, so it's hard to really get enough out of it. And so the last time that I made a strawberry blonde ale, and I actually took the strawberries, put it into a blender like I was making a smoothie, and then I added that. So basically, it was like a puree, the puree that I added, and I started with frozen strawberries.
Did you filter it, like try to get rid of the seeds, or?
No, I just added it all, and it kind of settled out in the in the fermenter. So
thank you.
But yeah, strawberries are kind of difficult. There's some fruits like that are difficult to get the flavor out of.
Did you add the strawberries to secondary?
Yes. Yeah, strawberries are added to the secondary. Kurt has a question here.
I have access to a lot of pomegranates, and I actually have access to a lot of fresh pomegranate juice because my wife juiced a bunch. And I'm wondering if anyone's made a pomegranate lambic or a pomegranate beer and what their experience was with it.
I think we've had several people in our club that have made them. I had a weird experience with pomegranate, and I added it to my beer, and it like instantly clouded up the whole beer. Even though I had this pomegranate juice that was clear, and I had the beer that was clear, and I added it to it, and the whole thing just went murky right away. And I was thinking, what is wrong with this? Something wrong with my beer or whatever. Then I added it to a commercial beer, and the same thing happened. So I don't know why that happened to me, but I've had other people's pomegranate beers which came out okay, and they didn't have that problem.
We have a Zoom question. How long do fruit beers last?
Oh, the question, how long do fruit beers last? I think it depends a little bit on the beer. So I think, yes, the fruit flavors will, in my experience, have tended to dissipate faster than, say, malt flavors. but maybe not as fast as hop flavors. So if you've got a beer that you're counting on the hops for, that one isn't going to last probably as long as a fruit beer. A fruit beer would last longer, but a beer that was a malt-driven beer would last longer than that. So I don't have a clear answer to that, but you will definitely see some loss in fruit flavor over time. But that again also depends on the fruit. Ryan.
I was just going to add, maybe some of you here know that there's some kind of salt you can add to raise your pH of the beer, and I can find out what that is because I know Peter at Belgian Beaver's done that with some of his sour. He thought the pH was too low, made some salt additions, raised the pH up. So that might work for pomegranate and some of the other stuff where maybe the acidity got a little out of control. You can do some post fruit salt additions to kind of get your pH back up in the more reasonable, easier drinking level.
Yeah, good point. Good point, Ryan. Any other questions? We got time for maybe a couple more questions. Lauren's got one.
Input. Looks like an input rather than question from the Zoomer. Suggestion is to add pectic enzyme, which causes a protein haze. Fruit has pectin, which causes a protein haze. So you add pectic enzyme, and it'll chews up the pectin, makes sugars, and clears the beer.
Yeah, I have heard that. I've not done that though before. All right, I think we're done. I think thanks for listening to this presentation. Hopefully it was fruitful for you.